right, Stacey, great to have you here. I'm glad we finally were able to make this happen.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I look forward to it. I think we're going to have a great time.
Love the positivity. Love the positivity. Well, given our amazing pre-call and given our amazing call last week, I'm absolutely certain that we will run the gamut on all things culture and operations, and what makes great businesses in hospitality. Tell me, before we dive into it, I always ask people to introduce themselves because I like to joke now, and I'm probably going to have to stop this joke, but I have a habit of botching people's introductions. And so, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and like how you got to where you are today?
All right, I'd be happy to. Well, like I said, thanks again for having me. So my name is Stacey Oliver-Knappe. It's a mouthful. People call me Stacey OK, and that's perfectly fine. And of course, there's a story behind the Stacey OK, but for another podcast. I am here in Orlando, Florida, the hospitality center of the world. I have 20 years of experience in human resources and training and operations, hospitality background, call center background. But my life, I'm a consultant now. And in my consulting business, I've done many verticals, retail, manufacturing, all kinds of things. So I've moved a lot beyond hospitality. I have a master's degree in human resources development, specifically training and staff development. So how do you get people at work to do stuff? That is my expertise academically. I have my Society of Human Resources Management certification. So that's the human resources admin piece. And I have a mini MBA. So I've got like a good mix of HR training and operational. How do you run an actual business? And that's what I like. I kind of call myself the Liam Neeson, if I can talk about another Irishman. Liam Neeson.
Very good reference.
I have a particular set of skills that, not many people have, wearing those different hats in my different places of employment, but also as a consultant. And, I work with businesses of any size, up and down, and how I got here, I don't really know some days, but it's mostly just been through meeting a lot of great people, just having opportunities come at me saying, Stacey, would you like to try carbonal industry? And no matter what the industry is, there are a lot of commonalities, especially when it comes to training and HR, that run the gamut across businesses. And I find that I can add some insights, maybe give them a helpful look at their operation and their business and their HR practice because I don't live in it. So I've got that kind of third element of, okay, this is more of a scientific, I'm going to come here as a scientist and look at what's happening and help you figure out how you can improve.
Well, I think that's actually a very important point you just made there, and the role or the kind of the strategic relevance of a consultant is like, you've got your very deep knowledge in human resources, from all your years of work, all years of training, and then your academic background around it as well. And, you're not in it on a day-to-day where people are in it on a day-to-day and thus don't see the sort of, is it the wood from the trees or the tree from the woods? I always get the phrase kind of back to front.
The woods for the trees. I think that's
woods for the trees.
Now I'm not sure myself.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, like I said, I'm out of botching things. But I think the broader point I'm making is that, it's very fascinating to have you on the show here to hear your perspectives on sort of I guess the role of HR, the role of people operations within the workplace, in particular in hospitality, because, I think I find that everyone's so engrossed in it. Everybody I've had on the podcast to date who is HR people, culture within sort of hospitality, lives and breathes it within that company to the point that they might not see the tree from the woods, so to speak. So that's why I wanted you to come on and kind of share your sort of consultant sort of insights in a way that when I have people who are very specifically within their own brand, very much live and breathe the exact process they have, which may or may not be the most kind of helpful for people to hear in the sense of how can I what's my takeaway from this QSR that's doing HR or where I'm in fine dining or whichever, you know what I mean? Might not be the same. And I think before we dive into your like amazing background and like the kind of point of view and all the different threads, there's just a quote that was on your LinkedIn that I love so much. Okay, and I think this might be a good jumping off point. And it's like an evil has taken over the workplace, employee turnover. And I'd love for you, like, because obviously, this is, we're talking about churn and we're talking about retention. But like, I'm curious your point here. Okay, with it being such a huge issue in like hospitality in particular, how would you like kind of add color to that statement? Because it's a bold statement. I mean, an evil villain is. I had a teacher in school who used to call like bad people in class villains. Like, get out of my classroom, you villain. It was very pretentious. But I'm curious, why you took that phrase and what you mean by that.
Well, what I meant by that is that when because employee retention is such a hot topic right now. It is, and it's a hot topic for a good reason. Unemployment is very low in the States. It's 3.9% is what it was in February, which basically means if someone wants a job, they can find a job. So as I see businesses, especially hospitality here in Orlando, and as I travel about, companies are just dying for people. Like, they really cannot find talent to do their hourly positions, servers, bartenders, front desk host and hostesses. So they're really having a challenge getting good people in the door. And then they're having the second challenge of keeping them. Yeah. And that's where, employee retention comes into play, is because it's the second part. You get them in the door. Now, how are you going to keep them? And the reason I used the word villain is I wanted to move the conversations a little bit into a more playful area so you can actually work on the problem. Yeah. Instead of being so stuck to the business analytics of it, getting your reports, figuring out, we have too many people leaving. That's a big problem. I like to kind of take it through the lens of the villain, because when I started at Disney, I worked there for 8 years. So it's always in my head, Disney will never leave me. Yeah. But the thing I liked about the villain part of it too, is that all villains have weaknesses. All of them can ultimately be kind of put in their place or, destroyed. That's a pretty heavy word. But they can all be influenced. They all have something about them that if you make a turn, if you make an adjustment, that it can minimize their impact. And that really is what employee retention is to me, is that it is like a villain, there is a weakness of why retention is a problem for you. And it's not the same. Different villains have different weaknesses. So what is a weakness in one company, why they're having trouble keeping people, could be different in your organization. And that's where the analysis kind of comes in. Besides, just everybody's leaving, we assume it's compensation. Sometimes you do need that outside person coming in saying, well, maybe it's not your compensation. Maybe it's that your leaders don't know how to lead people, and employees are leaving because they're not satisfied, they're not taken care of. And that's why I use the analogy of a villain, is that it can kind of be a little bit more playful, because when it becomes playful, then we can deal with it. Otherwise, it just seems, unemployment's what it is. This is just going to be a problem. We have no control. And a business absolutely has lots of methods and strategies they can use to minimize that. I call it voluntary termination. So there are different kinds of terminations. Voluntary terminations are people who are leaving who you don't want them to leave, and you need to figure out why. Involuntary terminations is you want them to leave. You either need them to leave, so you tell them to leave. Truly, that's what involuntary termination is that you have to let them go. But it's the voluntary terminations that are unexpected that can cripple a business.
And so I guess, it's interesting in light of like, we're in a post-COVID environment now. And I say inverse commas post-COVID because who knows what kind of version of it. But I guess the economy is somewhat back to normal. And maybe the people aren't normal anymore, but the economy is certainly kind of. But, when it comes to like, like the hiring marketplace, I mean, we're at the lowest unemployment in like the history of the state. Or the country rather, and we're looking at like hospitality numbers that are now at pre-COVID levels, and yet there's still an enormous demand for hourly talent. And I guess, what do you think are the things that make places attractive for employees that would be like needle movers in terms of like retention? Because clearly there's something out there that like we got to all these jobs, so people don't want to fill them. So like, what's the X factor, so to speak?
Yeah. So what I have seen, and as an HR leader and being a consultant as well, is that the recruitment process is so bad. The recruitment process is just awful. And it's important to think of the recruitment process as the beginning step of employee retention. If that recruitment process is awful, it's not caring for the candidates, then once they're hired, they may already be thinking of their exit plan because they just needed to fill out a job application to maybe get unemployment or whatever. They're just spraying and praying applications. Many people do that, right? So the recruitment process is awful. That's the first thing that's telling the candidates who may become your employees, like, we don't really care about you. We care more about us. We need a butt in the seat, fill out the application. So first they need to kind of look at their recruitment process. Is it candidate friendly? Are you communicating? Because those are the same things why people leave eventually, is because there's no communication. Hear about it all the time, candidates getting ghosted. So that would be the first step, is really look at that recruitment process. Is it sending the best about your company? Is it saying what your company stands for? Are you being kind? Are you being friendly? I mean, just those basic things that we want as human beings, especially after COVID. Coming back to what you said, is I don't think many companies have adjusted for that after COVID mind frame of that. You just can't recruit people the same way anymore. You certainly can't treat them the same way anymore once they get into the company, because employees have much less tolerance now for putting up with kind of bad working conditions. Yeah. And in hospitality, they're already rough. You're working awful hours. And when I was in hospitality working at a front desk, there's never a holiday. Every day is just a day. Yeah. And so you're already making what's going to be a challenging job worse by making it harder to come in. And then once they get in, you're still operating like it's 2018, and you can just run people to the ground before, and just hope they'll put up with it. And that can't be the way it is anymore.
And what do you think is kind of giving employees this type of leverage? Is it just the marketplace, or is like a grand realization? Like, what have you seen?
I believe it has a lot to do with the way companies treated employees in COVID, especially in hospitality. Like in hospitality, I live very near International Drive, and that's one of the main strips in Orlando that has just a plethora of hotels and restaurants. And within weeks, almost everything was closed down. And I don't mean like furloughed. We were opening up again, closed. And employers let hospitality in particular, and restaurants, they let them go so abruptly and so without any kind of parachute, without any kind of severance package, simply like, we're closing the facility, put it kind of plainly, too bad, so sad, we're sorry, right? Yeah. So what I believe is happening now is employees are remembering that. Like, this restaurant treated me awful. I am never going I'm never going there again. And I'm not working for them, and I'm not working for any other brand that's in their portfolio. So they're realizing that I was treated poorly. All of the story about an orientation, that you care about me and I can grow here, it was a lie. Now it may not have been, but the reality of how they were treated, the actions are speaking way more louder than what the story was that was being presented by the company. And that was harsh. That was harsh. And I believe that is what they are taking that into consideration. They're going to an employer. They may be on the job for a couple of months. They realize they don't like it. And they're like, you know what? I have no skin in the game here. I hate using a bunch of cliches, but I have no loyalty to this brand. I'm sure if something bad happened, they're going to fire me again. So I'll just go try my luck at another place and see if it's better.
So exactly that, when you talk about loyalty and trust, I mean, they're like euphemisms for culture. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
and so really, and it's definitely something I've heard on this near 100 episodes of a podcast at this stage. You know, yeah, no, I can't believe it. Which is like, you know, culture eats process for breakfast. I mean, I used to say that when I was in consulting, that used to be like our phrase, but like ultimately, like, what I think separates good from great in sort of hospitality is actually culture. I think, you know, if you break it down to like salary, they're all kind of the same. You know what I mean? Like different states might have different mandates, but like on a practical level, there's like a kind of normalized amount range that a GM can get or that like a server can get, you know, give or take whatever the difference is in sort of tips, for example. But like people don't really leave necessarily for that per se anymore. It seems to me that the entire conversation around employee retention is very much like, how do businesses like lean in heavily into culture now? Which I think is fascinating in and of itself, because it's like, why now and not why 5 years ago, like in 2019, like why not care as much, you know? And I'm curious, you know, because it sounds like, you know, we were talking earlier about like the evil villain being like sort of like employee turnover, okay, employee churn. And if it's not necessarily like a salary thing why people are doing it, it says to me like, you know, especially in the post-COVID world, it's like a culture thing. You know, when you're like dealing with clients, like how do they embrace the conversation around culture? How do they embrace the conversation around like designing a culture even?
Well, where culture starts is with your immediate supervisor. Your immediate direct manager is the person who will have the biggest influence on your career at that given moment. Yeah. So it is an interesting conversation. Sometimes the conversation goes smoother than not, about helping the leaders realize that you're the problem, or at least you're part of the problem. You don't need to throw a massive recognition program at this. You need to become stronger people leaders and engage with your employees. Because you're right, like basically in a market, unless there's just really some crazy wage disparaging, you know what I'm saying, wage differences. People are staying because they like, I heard this once and it's always stuck with me. They like what they do, they like who they do it with, and they like who they do it for. And I think that's basically what culture is that they have the tools to do the job. That's a part of culture too, is that really letting people have the tools and the training to do their job. I've seen in the post-COVID world, there's just not a lot of investment done for training, onboard training. It's basically sign your HR paperwork and go on the job. Yeah. That's sending a signal to the employee, like, look, they don't really care about you becoming an expert at this. We just need your body. So that's one thing that impacts culture, is how do you treat those first couple of weeks? Are you training them? Are you throwing them at the job? And, you know, with the leaders, it's just helping them recognize that their actions are the biggest impact to retention. That if you have to engage with people, and more when they're doing more than just the, I would say pre-COVID, we were more about the coaching about job skills. Like, are you doing your job right? Did you serve that drink correctly? Now with COVID, it's important that leaders connect with their employees as human beings. And that's just really a strange place for a lot of leaders. They're not sure how to talk to somebody. I mean, they're, you know, Alex, how's your day going? No. They yeah, right. They think like, what? I don't have time for chit chat, right? I don't have time for that conversation. But that's the conversation that would keep somebody, just to show like, hey, I recognize Alex showed up at work today. I'm excited to see him. Alex, thanks for coming in today. How's everything going? 2 seconds. I've seen leaders get cautious about engaging in this type of conversations because, one, they think they're going to get just a floodgate of information they don't want to know. Like, and then they're going to come to me in HR like, oh, Mike told me this information and I don't want to hear it. And then I'll say like, I don't want to hear it either. But that's not usually what happens. It's just because whatever happening in their personal lives is affecting their work. And after COVID, if you don't recognize that and give people the tools they need to handle life at home, they will just not perform at work. And eventually whatever's happening at home is going to take over and they're going to leave.
It's interesting. One of the things I think about a lot, especially doing this pod, is that like, there's like, I feel like a frontline hospitality workers never got the kudos that like frontline people in other industries got during COVID, and people forget that like, software people like me got sent to my apartment and it was fine. You know what I mean? Like I had a Peloton, I could exercise, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have to worry about like an office or openings and closures. And people in hospitality had to deal with like, mask mandates, had to deal with like learning curbside, third party becoming a huge part of their business, openings, closings, rebound opening, rebound closing, yin yang, yin yang. And, like they were there feeding us during COVID. And we kind of, in our collective memory almost, I feel like forget that was happening. And it's like we've just moved into this new phase. But I guess my take on it is everyone who worked in it was like, that was probably the worst time in the history of my life.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think like how that is shaped, I'm curious your take on this from like the leaders you've met, okay? How has COVID shaped the way they look at the employees? Because like there is a survivor bias for all the companies, especially the ones that are thriving now from COVID. It's like, and I have heard myself from certain leaders that, their respect for the people that were with them at the time is like up to 11, that like you stuck with them through thick and thin. But I'm curious, from the like your perspective, what the take on that is.
Well, I believe like it in general, hospitality workers are taken for granted anyway. Like when you go on vacation, you don't remember the staff really unless something really went wrong, egregiously wrong, or something went just over the top fantasy land right. We're always have been behind the scenes. We're always the people just making the beds and all the things that you don't want to do at home. That you have to do at home that you don't get to do on vacation. So I think there's always been an element of taking the hospitality industry for granted. I see post-COVID, somewhat it's still happening again, and that's why we have the problem, is that leadership pretty much wants to forget this finite time, which is not really finite because like you said, there's still dangers of COVID around. It didn't just stop all the way. But I feel like there's still that kind of taken for granted that, okay, that's over, because if you were a leader, you probably did go home. You went home, and whatever personal challenges you had in your life, you were able to deal with them, where not living the experience, not getting out into a restaurant. And I find this with many industries I deal with, but sometimes a leader, they grow so good and they grow so far and they get so high, they forget what it's like to be a frontline employee. They forget what it was like when they had their first job, or maybe that the last time that they waited a table. And it has changed. I always say, like, for example, my first job was Chick-fil-A. They're a fast food restaurant. It's really big in the South and around the country. So pretty easy. Yeah. And
on my hospitality podcast, I feel like they come up once an episode.
No, they come up all because they're known for service and they're known for their culture. But when I was there, we had to memorize all the prices of the food. It was in a very manual cashier register that I put the number in. We yelled to the person behind us what we wanted to eat, or we wanted to serve the guests, that'd be like one sandwich, one fry, all very manual. I don't think I could work in a Chick-fil-A now because it has changed so much. It's all, with technology and the systems. So when I make a decision as a leader, and I've seen this with other leaders, I don't do it as much myself because I'm more of aware. I'm making decisions based on what it was like when I had the job versus what the reality is like. So I encourage all leaders to go do a day in a frontline position so you can see what it is like now. And then, because that's what creates empathy, that's what creates compassion, all of those great buzzwords that we use in the culture area. But it's almost like if you don't experience it yourself, it is hard to imagine how difficult it is.
I mean, totally. I mean, I guess that's what makes like Undercover Boss compelling television.
That's why everyone loves it. Yeah.
Yeah, irrespective of how.
But when I see Undercover Boss, it makes me sad though. It makes me sad that they're so out of touch what's happening with their workforce, right? I mean, and they have the big reveal at the end of, we're going to pay for your son to go to college. It's like, why did it take that experience? You could put policies in place to make that happen. So that's what I don't like about the show, but
I think that's also like, just adding kind of context, like a broader issue within like management styles. Like, I mean, you just have to go on Twitter every week to see what's the latest QSR debacle because someone
quality.
Do you know what I mean? Like there's any number of why these places are so poorly run, you know what I mean? Or like why management is just not in touch with them. I mean, we're told the economy's crushing it, yet nobody can buy a house. And I mean, what are they doing? You know what I mean? I think it's a broader symptomatic issue around like leadership in general, which is like how far removed are you from the vulnerable stakeholders within the system? You know what I mean? Like I guess like frontline to the CEO of XYZ company, they're night and day different challenges in terms of like lifestyle, in terms of like, what do they say? Like wages are barely increasing in the country, but XYZ of different costs are like through the roof. Like purchasing power doesn't exist. And so like understanding, like I'll give you a very good example of like hiring, because this directly impacts like say hiring. And I remember about a year ago, there was a customer that I was listening on a call for, a prospect actually technically. And, they were wanting to open up a new store and they were in the Bay Area. And in the Bay Area, it's like, I mean, to live in San Francisco alone, it's not,
almost impossible.
You're basically, you're not really going to be like, it's just impossible, And, people have to come from the East Bay, and East Bay now, like you're talking about an hour and a half, 2 hours east. So if you wanted to open up in the North Bay, like Sausalito, like a restaurant, that's like, and this was when gas was like blowing up in price as well. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, how are you going to get people to like come from the East Bay? Because you can't go around to like the North Bay because like the Bay is there. You know what I mean? So like fast ways come into the city. But like, how do you think about like actually getting people into that restaurant to even come work there? Do you know what I mean? Like, how are you going to pay them? Like, what are you going to pay them? Like an inflated salary? Because you're not going to get them in an area. How are you going to launch your restaurant? I mean, it's amazing to me to think just like in terms of like, the last thing kind of people think about is people. When the first thing that makes a great hospitality business is the people. And I'm curious your take on culture in that context, because like, how do you, as a HR leader yourself, okay, making people think about the dollar value of great culture. That's always something I'm always curious about, because I'm like, some people like, it's not like the culture doesn't exist on the P&L.
No.
It's not like you read it and you go cost of goods sold. It's not like you see a line item which is like a cost of culture. You know what I mean? But like it's hard to describe, but when you see it. And so what do you think? How do you think about, how do you have like coach leaders or like work with teams to like really figure out how to put a value on like cultural initiatives that should help the business move forward?
Well, how I do it is I think like when your attrition rate with your turnover rate, that is a hard metric, and that is tied to your culture. Also, your recruitment costs, that's tied to your culture as well. So yes, there's not a line item per se. Productivity, people who are engaged, they perform at a higher level. So maybe you're serving more guests, maybe you're able to answer the calls faster. So there are ways to equate it to this is what it's costing you. And you have SHRM, the Society of HR, what they're saying, the last thing I read, but this is 2003, so it's already outdated a little bit, is that for every person you lose, recruitment costs, they estimated it at was almost $5,000. And I am sure it's more than that, because that's really just the raw cost of putting up the posting, going through the basic interview. That's not costing about you have to train somebody how to do a job. Your new person's not going to be anywhere near as good as the person who had the job. So there are costs that you can kind of run through calculations like this is impacting your organization bottom line. And the way to solve all of this is I always recommend to companies, like, first train your supervisory levels. Anybody who's a people manager, they need training on how to be a leader and how to install culture, how to instill high standards. They tend to get promoted themselves from being a hourly employee. They were good at it. They get promoted and then they just kind of flounder. And then they concentrate on things they were good at and they stay away from the things that would actually engage their team and get everybody excited and happy to come out to work. It's just as simple as connecting with people. And it really is, if they can't get this right, and documentation and all that stuff kind of plays into it as well. But if they can't get that frontline employee or the frontline supervisors and kind of that director level, if they can't give them the skills that they need to create these cultures, because it's a skill, you can make all the posters you want. You can make posters, swag, right? Everybody's got a coffee cup that says we're number one. But culture is action. It's action of what does your company do as far as policy, and then what does your leader do every day? If the company says that, oh, we respect diversity, but your boss doesn't, that's the culture that happens.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite interesting. I guess, as well, like, I mean, you've lived in so many different sort of roles within the sort of HR sphere, so to speak. Like operations, HR, and like human resource development. So like people training and development, I think is my understanding of what that is.
Yeah.
Like, I guess there's so many different roles within that. And I guess add some color to like how do you make these work together? Because one of the things is they're all individually siloed kind of things within organizations. And do you think that the fact that they are siloed kind of confuses the view of, say, sort of HR and the role of HR within sort of larger organizations? I'm just curious your take on, like, given that you've done all these different paths on the way up.
What I see is that typically culture is seen as an HR responsibility instead of really it's everyone's responsibility. It's not. HR can come up with maybe, the program, the introduction to it, but it is how operations and how things are trained. Those are the ones that will also contribute to it. So as an HR leader, I might get a program together and be the champion of it, but really it is a partnership with all three of those branches and all the other support elements too that create a business. It's all of them coming together and owning a piece of culture. Because what I've seen and what happened to me, but that's another podcast, is it would be, just HR's handling it, HR's doing it, go call HR. But the most important leader anybody has is the one right above them. And I get it why too, because of wearing all the hats where I lived in operations. I can get that HR can be very rigid and say like, no, you have to do it this way, and training will want to, take your employees off the front line, maybe more than you have the capacity to, and they just don't understand because they'll be like, oh, we have to do this, we have to do this. And then your operations team, they just want to keep producing whatever it is, either it's guest satisfaction or restaurant tickets, whatever it is. So they're not realizing it's a team effort. Everyone's doing their best and everybody, but that's why the silos happens, is because they don't understand how they all complement each other instead of compete with each other.
Which is interesting because, I mean, like when I think about it, I mean, you know, when you talk about like, say, training and development as one specific part of it, human resources, like when we think about it, like on a broad level, HR, you would describe that as sort of not like, what's the difference between human resources and operations in the context of human resources? When you say operations, do you mean like biz operations, or do you mean like people operations and managing the sort of the people side of things, or how do you think about like?
Yeah, sure. So operations in this context is like, it's whatever the business does. So like, hotel operations is actually checking people in, checking out, managing the resort. Human resources in that example that's the team who is doing the recruiting, the employee relations, the administration, the benefits and compensation elements. And then your training department, those are usually the ones who are like doing on-the-job training, upskilling people, doing leadership development. So that's how, in general, they're seen in most businesses. And so the operations is getting the thing you advertise as a company done. And then the other two are supporting functions.
And when you think about like the role of three and like how they kind of are in a sort of, not a tug of war, but there's like a kind of, it's almost like plate tectonics. There's a tension, you know, like there's a tension, and like, why am I thinking of plate tectonics? I don't know, but that's what came to mind as a type of tension. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and so I guess, you know, when you think about it, like your sort of what your vision or your desire for like a successful harmony across all three departments, like how would you visualize that? How would you articulate that?
Oh, I would like it to happen in what I am really going to start in my practice talk about when I talk to my customers and my clients, is that when you make a decision, do it from a holistic point of view, like really do it from a 360 point of view. When you make a decision, be it on culture, be it on any initiative, really walk through what will happen to each level of your organization when you implement it or you change it. So how will it affect the leaders? How will it affect the stockholders or the private equity firm, if that's what the ownership of the business is? How will it affect HR? How will it affect finance, accounting, frontline employees, general manager? So really, like I'm seeing it almost as a circle, and really think about how it's going to impact each other, and then have a dialogue about it. You know, ultimately someone will make the final decision. If you can come to consensus, great. I've seen that rarely happen, but even you get the majority there, that's where change starts happening. And when decisions are made in that way, instead of kind of autocratic, just do this because we said it, you tend to make smarter decisions that also eventually they affect your culture because everyone feels heard. And eventually that trickles down to your retention.
So the question here is really like communication then.
Always.
So I love how like the little thing, like they're kind of obvious. Of course it's communication, like, but you'd be surprised. And I guess, you know, especially in hospitality, which has such a kind of influx of, say, Gen Z now into the space, that it's like, is the message the medium or is the medium the message in one sense? So I feel like I still hear people talk about emailing candidates, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I don't know anybody under the age 25 who has an email address unless they really need to have one. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but you know, that's interesting too, because like some businesses managed by text, and many places that's illegal. You can't talk to somebody. Yeah, there was a lawsuit in California. I don't know how long ago. I can't remember, but I can't remember if it's class action or exactly all the things, but the lawsuit said you texted me after hours. And you texted me on my phone. Is
that a European thing or something?
No, I think this was Usually these things kind of bubble up in California first and then go everywhere else. But you absolutely can't text somebody when they're not working because then they are working. So there's a lot of things about giving phones to people. Yeah, and these are the things like post-COVID world, post-technology. How do we have to figure out all these answers to things that seem like, I text somebody, he doesn't think anything about it, but really I'm talking about work and I should pay him.
Yeah, which I mean is a very Gen Z thing as well. I think the rest of us are like, when we're on our careers, it's very much like just do whatever it takes, not batting an eyelid. If somebody said it's an 8 a.m. meeting, and you're like, yep, I will go. And it's like now very much like, tell me why I should go to that meeting outside of my working hours. And to hear that from like a junior employee, and like, wow, it's like the kind of tone has shifted. And obviously with a greater emphasis on work-life balance, inverted commas, whatever that might be. And then also stemming likely from, say, the COVID, because I guess like, I feel like a lot of people realize that like work is not the be all and end all anymore. And
I don't want to go to an 8 o'clock meeting.
Right. Yeah, like happy employees are like, I'm signed up to do these shifts. I'm signed up for these hours. I put in the hours. I do them well. This is the job. And it's an interesting one because I think like culture has to move with that now. Or is this new culture becoming the culture? If that makes sense. You know? So like, there's a reactivity element to it from existing structures, and then there's this sort of proactive movement towards sort of a more equitable, fair sort of working environment for people that were, for all intents and purposes, more maligned or kind of more taken advantage of than before than they are now, for example. Like we spoke about this earlier, like why when we think about retention and sort of policies and benefits to make people's work life happier, why these conversations weren't really happening in 2019. You know what I mean? It took like a global pandemic and so many people leaving and resigning out of the industry for people to realize how important frontline and hospitality staff are in the first place,
Yeah, and then I think there's a lot of questions people are asking your generation about how far do I want to go in a company? How high in leadership do I want to go, and how much am I willing to do to get there? Where my generation was like, of course, everybody wants to get it. Everybody wants to be at the top, even though there's not many jobs at the top. That's more with the mindset. I want to be at the top and I'll do whatever it takes. And I believe with the two things of the generation coming behind me, the technology being more flexible where you can work almost from anywhere, depending on what the job is, except jobs like hospitality where the person really has to be there. But those workers are also asking them, I seen what a GM does. That looks awful. That's tiring, right? So how do you create a place where people want to thrive and grow and be realistic about it? And I think that's going to be coming kind of out in the next 5 years too. What does it mean to be a general manager? What are the expectations? Is somebody who has toddlers, are they willing to work the long hours still? I don't know.
What do you think are the expectations right now, today? What do you think are what separates good from great in GMs today?
Actually, and I think this is changing too, because before, like typically the GMs were mostly men because their wives were taking care of the home life, and now that's changing as well. So I think it's going to be interesting now. For what like a GM is really working in a week, I'm sure they're working more than 40 hours a week, and they're on call. Basically, if the place is on fire, they're getting a call. Unless they've trained the people behind them, their assistants, they've got their systems and policies in place to make it where they can take a day off and, have the balance. But it's just, I think it's going to go where everyone, all positions start really evaluating how much work needs to happen and restructuring jobs to make them more, I don't know what to say, maybe just more human. Maybe that's a good word for it. More human.
Yeah. And who knew that
Human and
What a
human
leap!
resources. Go figure.
What a leap we've taken as an industry.
Yeah.
Like let's make the jobs more human. Especially in an era of AI and technological just upheaval. Like I refer to it sometimes as has it been evolution or revolution since like 2020? Like I mean, you can look at it kind of both ways. I'm very like fascinated by the role of the GM in particular now, because what I hear from people again and again on the show is that they're this sort of Swiss Army knife, giant sort of
Mm-hmm.
presence that makes or breaks a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
or makes or breaks like a hotel or whatever sort of role, but like they are the playmaker, and their expectations of them are like, how good are they with data now, analyzing
Mm-hmm.
data, being able to look at trend data? How good are they with a P&L? Do they understand how to run the business and how to like buy it, like manage like that, like the bookkeeping, like understanding it, whilst also being an incredibly gregarious people person that can sniff out fires before they even start. Like there's an enormous sort of demand on this type of person, and I'm like, where does it go? You know what I mean? Like you're saying
Yeah.
here, you're curious about what it's going to look like in the next 5 years. Like, what do you think? Like, what's a hunch you have for like how the role is going to evolve?
I think the hunch is that it's gonna GMs, the role is going to be not so intense as being the critical path. That's what it said in IT, right? When there's like one person who's the critical path, that will get smarter about making that role not so, if something goes wrong, this is the only person that can handle it. I believe training is going to get better for the understaff or the people reporting to a general manager, so they handle it better as a team. I really think that's the only thing that can happen to sustain businesses, is the pressure's got to come off of everybody, or retention's just going to keep being a problem.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a very valuable position as well because there's just a dearth of good GMs. There's a dearth of GMs in general in the marketplace for talent for GMs, but also
Mhm.
like there's an even bigger like quality of like quality GMs. And I think like, the ball or the leverage is very much in the GM court at the moment. I think and I'm curious, that's when it comes to the last things we talk about is like, the importance of training we spoke about in terms of like retention of staff. But like obviously we've lost such a kind of like a division of labor, like a division of laborers rather, like in the post-COVID, where the kind of people that were working in restaurants that would have graduated to GM positions never graduated to GM positions because the roles just didn't exist because they were closed. And now we have a lack of that kind of talent that's like available in the marketplace today. I'm curious, like when you think about like sort of like the demands on talent and training today, do you feel like there is a sort of an awareness of like we need to groom our leadership, like the leadership potential we have here, or is there training for training's sake because it's a benefit, so to speak?
I don't think enough attention's given to succession planning, is what you're talking about right now. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
who is going to take this role if someone should, because that's another problem with retention, is there's been no succession planning. So if a person does leave unexpectedly, you're just left with a puzzle of what are we going to do.
yeah,
So I think there definitely has to be succession planning done. And then you're doing training for the succession planning. And sometimes my clients will give me the challenge of, but I don't want to train them and they leave. And there's
yeah,
that famous Richard Branson saying of, but you don't want to not train them and they stay. You really want to invest in people. And that also contributes to your culture, is investing in people. So it's not a means to an end, it's a means to growing your organization, because now that things are settling back, and if you happen to be able to get, a hotel running well, you want to expand, what are you going to do? You're going to need two of everybody of the
yeah,
leadership team, and you've got no one. What are you going to do? And you're going to try to get that talent from outside the organization. That can be expensive. I used to deal with
yeah,
hospitality recruiters who were recruiting only leadership, and it's a lot more expensive than most people think to do that, to use an
yeah,
outsource.
exactly.
And sometimes it's worth it, but it's much more cost effective to train people inside because they love
From
the
within.
brand. Yeah, they love the brand. You already know they're steady. They enjoy what they do. They enjoy who they do it for. And you're just helping them with the skills to be able to handle the additional responsibilities that come with leadership roles. Like you said, managing finance. Nobody teaches you about a P&L until you get one thrown in front of you. Like
Yeah,
even in school, right? Even if you go to, I got all that fancy education behind me, and I never saw a P&L until I became a vice president. And I was like, oh, I need to go to my finance friend and get an explanation about what this is. So that's important. That's important.
Totally. Can you believe that we've been speaking for almost an hour? Can you believe that?
I'm looking at the time and I can't believe it. I imagine we could go on for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much hallowed ground we could cover.
I know you guys can't see my notes, but I had a lot more notes of what to talk about, but not for another time. Maybe for another time.
Well, we might do a part two, as they say on Francais. But here, one of the last things I want to ask you about, Stacey, is, like, what advice would you give people listening to this here on what we spoke about today? Imagine these are your peers that are listening, so to speak.
So what I would do is really, if you want to kind of get in front of the retention problem, is really upskill everybody in basic HR practices. If they're a people leader, upskill them in basic HR practices. And part of that is, how do you connect with people? How do you keep good records? And then I'd also just make sure that not only we didn't talk about documentation, but make sure you have an employee handbook of some kind and that you're talking about it. Usually the employee handbook is more used as a gotcha tool. I'm going to fire you, Alex, because you violated this policy. Alex has no idea what this policy is. So he's feeling bad, like, how can you fire me? But it was all in the employee handbook. So I'm a big believer in having an employee handbook and then circulating it. I think of them as just playbooks. Like, while you are here on this team, this is our playbook. And if you use that is building your culture of integrity, of compassion. And I think between those two things, you'll go really far impacting this crazy challenge we're having right now, keeping good people.
Oh, that's awesome advice. I gotta hand it to you. Totally. That's amazing. Well, Stacey, thanks so much.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure.